Okay, hello there. Today we are going to learn about groups of biomes that are similar because of the amount of precipitation and the temperature of an area. So these are called biomes, and they're like broad areas around the Earth where the ecosystems are very similar because there's going to be very similar organisms that can survive in with these two factors. So here are the main categories of biomes that we're going to see as you look around our lovely planet. At the cold and dry end of the spectrum, we have, of course, the tundra. And so the far north of our planet, where there's land, you can have ecosystems that are all pretty similar because they're based on mostly plants that can survive the very short warm season of the year, and then when it gets cold, of course, nothing is alive, no plant life will be alive, and the organisms that do survive there have to have a way of getting through that cold part of the year. At the hot end, still dry, of course, is desert ecosystems. And so around our planet, you can probably think of quite a few places like in Africa or South Central North America and Australia, where there's deserts, very hot, at least during the day, and they cool down at night. And of course, limited organisms that can survive there. In between, we have our grasslands. It's a little wetter and a little warmer. And you can, of course, think of places like the prairies, where there's lots of grass, and then organisms that like that as a food source, and the others that survive on it. And then at the wetter end here, depending how warm it is, you get different forests. The taiga is northern forests, like here in Canada, we have a lot of taiga, where there's a lot of coniferous trees, and then deciduous forests, which is like southern Ontario here and further south into the US. And then, of course, rainforests down closer to the equator, where there's lots of heat and lots of water. And of course, that's where we get the greatest amount of biodiversity. All right, so let's take a little tour of the biomes of North America and learn a little bit about them. So again, we're going to start at the cold and dry end of things, and that would be the tundra. And so the northern part of Canada here is all tundra, and so it has very short summer growing season when you might get some grasses and mosses growing, and that's enough to sustain little guys like this lemming and these caribou, and so they live their lives off of those organisms, and then of course a few predators like this cool snow fox. Yeah, so very limited lichens, moss, and grass, and so the number of other organisms that can sustain themselves on that is fairly small. Secondly, the taiga. So the taiga is otherwise known as the boreal forest, and the key thing about boreal forest is it's all coniferous trees. The coniferous trees have cones. So any of those evergreen type trees that you've seen around that have cones, that would be the taiga. And so the taiga is like most of Canada is taiga. You get a little bit. I guess there's some grasslands here. Sorry, in the middle of Canada, but most of it is taiga. If you go up northern Ontario, trees all turn into coniferous trees, and then of course there are creatures that can eat some of that and some of the other plants that grow there seasonally. And you have things like this cute little marten here, gray wolves, and other organisms that can survive under those conditions. Okay, grasslands. So grasslands is sort of like central North America here. It's a little bit of our prairie area here in Canada, and then of course down into parts of the U.S. there. Think of places where the buffalo roam, the deer and the antelope play. Any place where the predominant producer is grass. you will have lots of organisms that like to eat grass, and then of course others that would survive further on along the food chain. Okay, deciduous forests are this big section here, and then a little bit over here on this side of North America. And what you find there are, of course, it's a lot wetter, and you get a lot more biodiversity. You get lots of broadleaf trees. This is like an oak, and then I'm not sure what this tulip-shaped one is. But there's a bunch of different types of broadleaf trees and plants. And of course, broadleaves are a lot more edible. And so you get a lot greater variety of organisms, lots of bugs, lots of nuts, lots of squirrels. And of course, along with that comes the larger herbivores and carnivores that you might see in this part of the world. Deserts, the western part of the U.S. and some down into Mexico here is lots of desert area. And of course, deserts are more dry, and the temperature is hotter, at least during the day and during the summer months. And then so you have organisms that have to be able to survive a fairly limited amount of water. And so that means you're going to have a limited amount of producers, so things like cacti. This here is a Joshua tree. There's some of these little scrappy little sedge type shrubs and bushes. And so because there's going to be limited plant life, of course, there will be a limited animal life too, with a lot of interesting ways of surviving. Finally, rainforest is the most biodiverse, and so way down here and through South or Central America and into South America would have lots of rainforest ecosystems. Rainforest ecosystems, because of the warmth and the abundance of water, have the greatest variety of living things on Earth, or at least in the terrestrial part of Earth. And one neat way that produces so much biodiversity is a layering thing that happens there. And so those layers allow there to be a lot of different niches, a lot of different places for organisms to survive and coexist. And so you have a whole set of organisms that live down low in the ecosystem, and like they go, get their needs on the ground and whatever falls from above, and they can survive on that. And then midway up these large tree areas, you'll have a whole other set of living things that never go down to the ground, or very rarely, and they get their needs met there. And then at the top, where these guys finally reach the sun, you have what's called the canopy. And the canopy has a whole other set of living things that survive up there. And so that layering is what adds to the great biodiversity that you find in rainforests. Okay, of course, living things are also found underwater. That's where life began, after all. And there can be differences in the type of ecosystems underwater as well. The main thing that influences the amount of living things that you might find, apart from temperature, is the availability of nutrients. And so if you have lots of nutrients, that's called a eutrophic situation, and if there's lots of nutrients and lots of sediment, that leads to lots of plant growth, or producer growth, I guess would be another way to term it. And of course that will support a greater variety of living things. Now when there's low nutrients, it's called oligotrophic, and that means you're going to have less producer growth, and of course that means fewer other organisms that can survive there as well. All right, so finally we have marine ecosystems. Marine means in the oceans. So of course there's salt water in the oceans, and the places where you find the most marine biodiversity are usually the places that are closest to shore and where it's warmest. And so the warmth, of course, means that more green organisms that produce energy can survive. And so as you go further south in North America, you're going to see greater biodiversity. And the close to shore thing also means they'll have more sunlight, and you'll also have lots of nutrients that tend to wash off the land and into the water. And so places near shore and where it's warm will be the most biodiverse. Okay, hope you enjoyed learning about land and marine ecosystems.